Hello again, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife. And one of the books that I picked for my 5x5 reading challenge, which I talked about earlier in the year, is The Read-Aloud Family by Sarah Mackenzie. I have not been able to stop talking about it. I absolutely love it. To be completely honest, though, because life and babiness, I'm only halfway through, but I'm totally going to finish this and I'm so excited and I just had to share it with you today. So that's what I'm going to do. As always, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you are listening to Life of a Military Wife. Okay, so like I was saying in the intro, I kind of went a little valley go there for a second. Sorry. Um, yeah, I have been talking about this with absolutely everyone, and I can't stop talking about this book. I absolutely love this book. I don't know where it's been all my life. Um, yeah, I'm so grateful for Jar of Fireflies. She's the YouTube homeschooling mom that I adore. Well, one of them, that recommended this book. Little does she know how much it changed my life. But anyway, the Read Aloud Family book by Sarah Mackenzie was inspired by the Read Aloud Handbook. And so I'm going to refer to that a little bit through this. But basically, it talks about how reading aloud opens up opportunities for teaching moments, especially with our kids. And I'm going to be covering a lot of different things, but basically I'm going to cover them as I was going through again, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that," and it made me think of things. So, it might seem out of sync or in a weird order to you guys, but it's based off of the book. And so it's just thoughts and ideas, impressions I had with the way she had the book laid out. And I'm like I said, I'm not completely finished because life happened, but I'm halfway finished. And if the second half is as good as the first half, this is going to be fantastic, people. Anyway, um, so basically she talks about how reading aloud to our kids opens up opportunities for discussion, for teaching moments, for things like that. And one of the ideas or one of the stories from doing this with my kids that came into my mind was Anne of Green Gables. We have listened to the audiobooks and readers theater. I've listened to those with my kids, and there's one point where Anne gets accused of taking Marilla's brooch and she didn't do it. And so to just get over with whatever punishment, whatever, just so she can move on and do what she wants, she comes up with this huge story that's completely fake on how she took it and lost it and whatnot. And then Marilla realizes that she just misplaced it and tells her that you should not lie, even like, you should never lie, and you should never accept responsibility for doing something wrong that you did not do. And that is a really important lesson. And the other thing is that adults make mistakes. And sometimes we need to slow down and make sure we aren't the one who messed up before accusing the kids. So, not my proudest mom moment, but I have had a similar experience with my kids where I'm like, why did you take XYZ? Blah, 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 blah. And then I start looking for it and I realize, oh, wait, mommy misplaced it. And I have to go to them and apologize. And so that was a really good opportunity to talk to my kids about how, you know what, if you didn't do something wrong, don't say you did. And second of all, sometimes adults make mistakes and we need to apologize too. So that I think was just a really great learning experience for us as a family and for me as a parent. The other thing is it teaches kids are able to see through stories and through literature and reading that life has ups and downs, that there are trials, that there are things, and how people handle those trials and overcome those trials. Because really compelling books have issues, they have something they have to resolve, and kids can learn through other characters, how they resolve those problems. C.S. Lewis is quoted in this book, and I really absolutely enjoy this quote, so I'm going to read it directly. C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis said, "Since it is so likely that they, referring to kids, will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Otherwise, you are making their destiny not brighter but darker." And I think that's really true because our kids are going to have hard times, because they're going to run into opposition. They're going to have things that they need to overcome and conquer. It's good for them to see in literature how that has been accomplished, or even in historical fiction. Some really compelling and amazing stories are true of how people have done that in the past. So that was one that hit me. The other thing that I thought was really fun and exciting, and I always love it when I find these little tidbits, is my alma mater has done some research along these lines, and I was unaware of it. Dr. Joseph Price, an associate professor of economics at Brigham Young University, specializes in economics and family education. He did some research in regards to reading out loud, and he found that um, in his research, 1 extra hour per week of parents reading aloud in the first 10 years of a child's life increases standardized test scores by half a standard deviation. That's as many as 15 to 30 percentile points. It's huge. That's tremendously significant. And I think sometimes people think, oh, my kid's too young for me to start reading out loud to them. They're a toddler, they're a baby, they don't have the attention span. Actually, they do. I started reading out loud to my kids when they were like 18 months old. And I wish I'd done it sooner, because you can actually dude, you can start reading out loud to your kid when they're in utero, because they can hear you. And so it's never too early to start reading out loud to your kids. Don't expect them to sit and listen to a chapter book, but you can read them little books, and especially books that have got a cadence or rhythm to them, or rhyming. Those are things that kids have attention spans. Or poems. Poems can be really short. And those are fantastic, especially for little kids. I love poetry. My mom got me into poetry, and recently I realized I've been reading out loud to my kids. Um, yeah, with varying levels of success and varying levels of consistency. Mostly because of the example of my mom not knowing about any of this wonderful research or any of that. But one thing I hadn't been reading to my kids was poetry, and I particularly love poetry. So I've started doing that a lot lately. Anyway, another thing I wanted to share is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development found the more children are read to, the higher their test scores are, sometimes as much as half a year's schooling. This is regardless of the family's income. In fact, it's more effective than tutoring or even private education. And that is phenomenal. I mean, if you want a magic bullet to help your children succeed, read aloud to them. According to the Commission on Reading from 1985, the single most important activity for building knowledge required for eventual success is reading out loud to your children. And to me, that's mind blowing. Like, one of the most important things we can do is read out loud to our children. And I know you're thinking, I don't have time. We will get to that. We will get to that, people. But part of the reason why it's so helpful is because it helps kids with language acquisition, specifically grammatically correct and sophisticated language patterns. They tend to have a better vocabulary, and I've seen that with my kids. My kids will pull out stuff, and I'm like, dang, where'd you get that? And it's because we read out loud. They love reading. Um, it's just something that has been integral with our family for lots of different reasons. Another thing is reading for fun. Sometimes we just get so caught up in, you know, reading for a grade or reading textbooks or required reading or whatnot. Make sure you're reading for fun. I made the mistake in college because I love reading. I'm a voracious reader. I have I've always loved reading. Well, no, correction. I've loved reading for a long time, and we'll talk about my struggles with reading at the beginning of my life. Um, but anyway, when I got to college, I was worried because I am a very slow reader. I'm a massively slow reader. I have great retention and reading comprehension. If I read it once, I can read a book once and I'll remember the nuances. I'll be able to quote it for years. But I'm very, very slow, very, very slow at reading. And it's because I have dyslexia. I have some, you know, some struggles, and I'm working on those, and I've been working on those. And I was lucky to get some help with that when I was a kid. But anyway, I decided that to get through college, to be able to accomplish all of my required reading, I was not going to read for fun. I was that way I would get my reading done and I wouldn't be distracted. And I almost went my entire college career doing it and I was miserable. I did find some really great, fascinating, wonderful college textbooks. I'm luckily a nerd of enough that I did enjoy some of my college textbooks, but it just was such a huge struggle. And finally, near the end of my college career, my husband and I got married, and he's a voracious reader too. And we just had more books, fun books around. And I just couldn't help but pick them up and start reading. And I realized I have the self-control to read fun books but then to pick up my textbooks when I have to. And so that was a good learning experience for me, is that, you know what? I do have the discipline to be responsible, but reading for fun is just something that brings joy to my life. So, the other thing is it helps build empathy. And that one, I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was kind of intrigued. It was not something I'd thought of that way. So, um, Keith Oatley, and I hope I'm saying this right, he's a cognitive psychologist for the University of Toronto, conducted a study which showed that reading fictional stories increases a reader's empathetic responses to people in their real life. And then um, Carnegie Mellon University found that reading stories gives the brain similar network connections to actually living through those experiences yourself. And that was powerful. I did not know that. I'm not completely surprised or shocked. That makes sense logically, but I didn't realize the research behind it. And it's wonderful. And the author goes on to talk about how she read Johnny Tremaine with her kids, and that helped her daughter relate better to a kid with a disability. And their other peers were struggling to do that. She talked about the book Wonder and how that could help people understand the struggles of individuals with disabilities. And I think that's fantastic. I really do love that. Um, the other thing that she talks about is audiobooks. Audiobooks count too. And this is where we're going to get into a little bit more practical, a little bit more away from what she talked about and a little bit more of my life experience with reading out loud. So, my mom was an educator and elementary school teacher for my entire childhood and loved to read. My mom's a voracious reader and she's actually a rather good writer. And she would read to us, she'd read out loud to us. And I may have spoken about this before. I'm not sure if I have in the podcast, but my mom, we were struggling to read, my siblings and I. We had different learning struggles and challenges. Like I said, I'm dyslexic. And I was just struggling in school, and my second grade teacher said I was too stupid to ever learn how to read, which was not very flattering. Luckily, I had some wonderful people in my school, and I got pulled aside and helped figure out some techniques to help me with my reading. The thing was, I could read. I struggled reading out loud, and I still struggle with reading out loud, but practice I realize helps a lot. But um we had to do a book report, and my teacher just expected me not to have done mine. And I go ahead and turn mine in, and I had read the Boxcar Children. And she calls up my mother and she's like, "Did she really do this? Did she really read this book?" And she's like, "Yeah, I saw her. She knows everything about it." And she's like, "You didn't read it to her?" And I'm like, "No, she read it all by herself." And my teacher was shocked. And so she kind of ate her words on that one, which kind of made me feel super proud. But it was just one of those things where I struggled with it, but my mom, she never gave up on us. And I got to the fourth grade and I was still struggling, especially with reading out loud. And so at the parent teacher conference, my teacher talked to her about it. She's like, try to read out loud with her every day. Try to do your best. Well, the prophet of our church, as I said, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at the time made a promise to the members of our church that if they would read the scriptures out loud with their children would do better in school. And so my mom's like, dude, straight up my alley. I'm going to do this. You promise? I will see if it comes true. So my mom, true to form, every single night got us to read even just a few scriptures, even if it was just one scripture each, out loud every day. And by the next parent teacher conference, my teacher was like, "Oh my goodness, she is doing fantastic. Her reading has improved drastically. What are you doing?" And my mom told her, and she's like, "I wish I could recommend that to my other parents, but sadly, I cannot tell them to I cannot tell them to read the scriptures with their kids because it was a public school. In religious schools, that wouldn't be an issue, but at a public school, it's not exactly something a public school teacher can do, unfortunately. But it worked. It worked for us. And then, so the other thing is just doing your best, even if it's just a little bit. She talks in her book about even if it's just 10 minutes. 10 minutes adds up. It doesn't have to even be 10 minutes a day. What if it's 10 minutes 3 times a week? You've got that. You can find 10 minutes somewhere, even if it means you put your phone down, foot down. Haha. I mean phone. Even if it means just setting your phone down, reading during lunchtime or reading during breakfast or dinner, something like that. And that was something like yeah, I have one of my points here I'm reading and I don't understand where I was getting at it. Oh, yeah. Here, then this ties right in. It took me a few seconds. Again, life with a new baby and lack of sleep. Anyway, so today, for example, I couldn't find the book that we've been reading out loud to our kids. And the other book that I tried to read out to the kids, they weren't very interested in, and I'll get into that in a hot minute. Just a second. But I just sat down and I'm like, okay, Treasure Island. That's a good boy book. Pirates and adventure and buried treasure. So I pulled out Treasure Island, but I was trying to feed the baby the bottle and read, and I couldn't hold the book. So my 6-year-old was holding the book while I read, and then occasionally I'd have to like burp her and stuff. And so my 10-year-old would jump in and read a paragraph or two. And that was really great because it was giving my 10-year-old a chance to practice reading out loud. And the other day when we were having a snow day, and it's just made my mama heart look so proud. My 8-year-old decided to sit down and she wanted to snuggle her baby sister and read her a book. And I just was like, happy mom moment. But yeah, just your kids can even be the ones reading out loud. It doesn't have to be you all the time. If you've got older kids, they can take turns reading out loud with you to the younger kids, which we have done. There's been times where I've been making dinner or whatever, and my older son has read to my younger son. And I'm so grateful for that help. And then they may not be ready. Like you might have a book you completely just want to read to them, which is what happened to me, and they're just not into it. And that's fine. They might be into it later. That's okay. I wanted to read this book. It's called Tennis Shoes Among the Nephites, and I forgot that the first 5 chapters are really slow. And I lost my kids before we even got to the fun stuff. So you know what? When they're a little older, we'll revisit that one. And the same thing happened with me and my siblings. My mom wanted to read the Narnia books to us, and so she wanted to do it in chronological order of the story arc. And so she started reading The Magician's Nephew. And oh my goodness. Yeah, she had to stop and quit because we were not ready for Magician's Nephew. So she skipped to Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, which we absolutely loved. We ate it up. And she was able to go back and read Magician's Nephew to us when we were a little older, and that was fine. So just keep trying. The other thing is have physical books around. And as convenient as it is to we do audiobooks. There are times where I'll put on an audiobook for the kids and we'll all sit down and fold laundry together. We'll have a laundry folding party. And my kids love that. That's actually a really great way to entertain them while they're folding laundry, which can be a really boring chore. But the other thing is having physical books. So when my kids were really little, and I've talked about this a bit, I had nerve damage and I was disabled. I couldn't do, oh, sorry for the yawn again. I couldn't do as much around the house as I wanted to. And so there were times where I just really couldn't do much because I was hurting. And so I would sit down and I'd read a book and watch them play and watch the kids play. I did this enough that eventually I'd sit down with a book and the kids would see me and they'd grab books and sit down on the couch with me. And they couldn't read yet, any of them, but they would sit and they'd look at the books and they'd pretend to read. And it just made my heart so happy because they loved books. And since then, I have made it a goal in my house. We have a ton of books. And we have a ton of books that are available to the kids. And I will admit, there have been times I have greatly lamented our children's access to the books because they don't put them away mommy would like. And so they're no longer neat and organized, and I have to reorganize them every couple of months to keep my sanity. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love that my kids have books and they will just grab books and read and just read for fun without being asked. And that makes me so happy. So, I guess the takeaway I'm trying to share with you is if you don't have kids, read for fun, read for yourself. It's good. It's good for you. It's really good for your mental health and for your just broadening your horizons. The other thing is if you have kids, whether you have grandkids or nieces and nephews or kids of your own, read. Read, even if it's just 5 minutes or 10 minutes, even if it's an audiobook in the car. We have started listening to audiobooks and readers theater, and I love it. I think it's fun and fantastic. I enjoy it. And it's been great. My kids really love it. And part of the reason why we got into, and I'm going back into story time again, even though I was wrapping up. So my mom would play audiobooks in the car because I get motion sick. Not as bad now as when I was a kid. So I could not do anything during road trips or I would be ill. And so my mom started playing audiobooks because I could close my eyes and just listen. And I loved it. Well, I had some audiobooks that I had gotten for my received for my birthday, and they were in the car. And normally on road trips, we put movies on for the kids, and the DVD player broke. And I was freaking out because the kids were at each other's throats and we were going nuts. And I was just like, I can't live without this TV. And then I remember the audiobook I had in the van and I popped it in and it was Anna Green Gables, and or was it Secret Garden, that one? Anyway, it was one of them. Oh my goodness. Um, they just ate it up. They totally loved it. They were quiet for the whole rest of the road trip. And I was so grateful. And actually, ever since then, we really don't watch that much with the kids in the car. We listen to audiobooks and Reader's Theater. I love, love, love Reader's Theater. I think it's fantastic. Anyway, and that has made a huge difference. That has been just great. And it's just better. I like having my kids be able to use their imaginations and not the screens. Anyway, we've recently watched the movie Narnia, and I had the wonderful experience of my kids saying, "That's not what I thought so and so looked like. That's not how their voice sounds. That's not." Like, it was great. It was fantastic. That's not who says that line. Mr. Tumnus doesn't say that. Miss Beaver says that. And I'm like, yeah, there's a difference between books and movies, kiddos. So that was a fun journey to have with the kids. But anyway, like I said, I've gone even over what I normally, I've gone a little bit over time on this episode, but that's because I really love this book. I cannot stop talking about it. And I'm like, why am I not telling my listeners about this? Because this book is fantastic. So that is my plug for it. It is by Sarah Mackenzie. It is called The Read-Aloud Family, and it is based off the Read-Aloud Handbook. And I totally recommend it. So that is my take on reading as a family. So, as always, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you have been listening to Life of a Military Wife.